Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and it is week 3, which means it is time for your host Battle of the Booktuber vlog. This is round 3, so I'm sure that you guys are all aware by now, but at the end of every round of Battle of the Booktubers, I always post a vlog with the recommendations these booktubers gave to me to allow them to get a few extra points right before the end of the competition. So today we are starting that vlog for round 3, and the first book that I will be starting with is The Poppy War. This is a book that I honestly had written off of my TBR prior to this competition. I knew a little bit about the fact that it had to do with some wars, I believe, maybe wars within China, I think is kind of where the inspiration came from. But that's kind of all I knew. I knew that the main character was a girl, she goes to a military school, and things ensue. That's kind of all I knew going in. The reason that I had kind of written it off was I had heard that the storyline in general was very bleak, that the main character does some things that are very questionable, and it's also compared to The Grace of Kings, which I have read in the past, and it was kind of a little bit of a slog for me. I loved some components of Grace of Kings. I really loved the characters and the individual, like, zooming in of their lives, but I hated the overarching war elements. And so I just, anything that's compared to it kind of gives me a little bit of pause. And so that's why this one had been written off of my TBR. But we all know Battle of the Booktubers makes us do things that we weren't originally planning on doing. And so I am going to pick this up for this competition, and I'll tell you guys my thoughts as I go along. I did read 40% of The Poppy War yesterday and the next 10% this morning, and so I thought I would stop and give you guys a little bit of an update on how I'm feeling. I will also let you know a little bit more of the storyline because I didn't really tell you that in the intro clip. So if you haven't heard of The Poppy War, you do follow a main character named Ren, who is a war orphan. And so in the country that she is in, there was a massive war. Her parents both died, and she was mandated to be taken in by a specific family by the Empress. So the Empress of that time had decided that any family that had less than 2 children would be taking on war orphans to prevent those war orphans from becoming homeless and other, like, street urchins and things like that. And so she's put into a situation where her family really doesn't want her, and they see her as more of a burden than anything else. They also are drug runners, and they own an opium trade, and they essentially force her to work in the shop, in the opium den. And so she has a really horrible start in life, has been made to do some really terrible things as a child, and the next thing is her family is trying to marry her off to an influential person in the city that they're in to try and help their drug trade be more prominent. So I think he has something to do with the police force, if I remember correctly, and so it's essentially going to give them a way to divert the authorities. So she doesn't want to get married. She wants to be her own person and be in control of her own life, and doesn't want to be told that she's going to marry a man. I think he's 3 times her age. And so the only way out is essentially for her to pass this test that they have all of the citizens in this country take. And the test puts people into certain categories and certain academies if they score high enough. So there's like a medical academy, a literature academy, and then the most prestigious of the academies is the military academy. And most people who take the test and pass the tests are wealthy individuals, people who are born of privilege, who have had the opportunity to be educated throughout their entire lives to prepare for this test, which does not include how Ren was raised. And so she essentially studies for a really, really long time and throws her heart and soul into this test and makes it into the school. Now, she does make it into the military school because she does not have any finances, and so the military school is the only one that provides students with free tuition, and so that was the school that she ended up having to go into. So after she gets into the military school, I'm not going to give you many more details than that. She is training to become proficient and stay within the school, because there are, I think they call them cullings, where they essentially kick students out if they don't make it past the next level. And so she's essentially desperate to stay because she doesn't want to go back home. And then you have events ensuing. There's also like an overarching political landscape that you're learning about, as well as the old wars that had happened, new wars that have potential for starting. And so you learn about that, as well as her going through her training. So at 50%, I am a little concerned. I am not hating the book by any means. Right now, it's just kind of okay. It's very easy to read. I'm reading it on audio. It's going by really quickly. For a 19-hour audiobook, reading it in 1 and like a quarter days isn't bad at all. But there are just a few things, a few details that are irritating me a little bit, and one that I think is going to continue throughout the series. And so we'll see. We'll see how it goes. The first thing that's kind of irritating to me is just the main character in general. I do not enjoy Ren, and I don't think I'm supposed to. I believe from reading reviews a long, long time ago that Ren is considered a morally gray character, and she definitely does some things that are not great. She also, the part that irritates me about her is the fact that she has a little bit of a victim mentality. This is something that irritates me in a lot of books that are the story of the person who is not supposed to achieve a certain level of, infamy or power or, blah, 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 insert item here. I believe that these storylines can be done without having someone constantly blame outside forces for them needing to do certain things. And I'm not saying that those scenarios aren't true. Ren has been given a horrible lot in life. She has been placed in horrible situations as a child, and there are circumstances that she has had no control over. And so I'm not saying that her feelings regarding what she's been through are unjust. I just hate to see her constantly go back to it and use that as a motivation to persevere. I wish that she would see value in herself and at least learn to. I also would have accepted like a character arc, which very well may happen in the last 50% of the book. But the first 50%, all I've seen is when she has to push, she reminds herself of why she is where she's at. And she reminds herself of these horrible circumstances that she has circumnavigated and doesn't want to go back to. And I wish that I want to see her reach for something more. I want to see her reach for something more than I don't want what I used to want. And I blame the people around me for acting a certain way and for perhaps having more than I have. And once again, I'm not saying that the people around her aren't more privileged than her and do have more opportunities than she has. I just wish that she would focus more internally, or, like I said, have a little bit of a growth moment as well, where she starts realizing like, none of that's going to change. I can't change other people's perception of them, but I can, help myself in this by doing these, XYZ steps. So that's just one thing that I really would prefer to see a little bit more growth from her on that end. Mainly because at this point, I almost feel like she is reverting. I feel like we saw a little bit of growth from her in the first 50%, but some decisions that she's made recently, I feel like, I'll just say that she's a little power hungry, and I think she's making decisions for the wrong reasons. And that's concerning to me. The other thing that I haven't enjoyed so much is the connection, and I'm not going to say too much on this, but the connection of power to drugs in this. As someone who has had people who have struggled with substance abuse in the past in her life, that is something that I don't like to see glorified. And this book is very much toggling a line between it being a good thing and it being a bad thing. And so I could see it going in a direction that I do enjoy, but I also I just worry about the connection to drugs. So we'll see how that line goes as well. On to some of the things that I do enjoy about the storyline. I've enjoyed the pacing. I really like the side characters. I like, is his name Kaiju? Now, for whatever reason, I'm forgetting, but she's a buddy in the school who has kind of befriended her and has kind of stuck with her through thick and thin type of stuff. I do really enjoy his character, and I also enjoy the Professor Zhang. He's very odd, he's eccentric, but I think he adds a little bit of flavor to the cast of characters and a little bit of mystery as well as to what's going on. I do also enjoy learning about the elemental powers that exist within this world. I think that's really fun. So we'll see what happens in the next 50%. As of right now, like I said, I'm not hating it. I'm not loving it. It's just kind of in the middle for me. So as of right now, it's sitting at about a 3-star, but we shall see what happens in the later 50% of the book. Okay guys, I have finished The Poppy War, and so I wanted to pop in and give you guys my thoughts and my final rating. And this book was not for me. I kind of said this in my intro clip, but I have in the past been avoiding this book just because of some of the things that I had heard about it. And I think that I was correct in my original assessment of why I wouldn't have enjoyed the book, which does have to do with how bleak and how destructive some of the content in it is. If you were going to read this book, you should definitely read trigger warnings. I knew going in that there were some things in this book that were very gruesome. I had just heard people talking about it. I did not know quite to the extent that the author does go. I won't talk specifics because I don't want to trigger anyone, but there's definitely a war going on. And I do think that it's important for authors not to shy away from some of the things that go on during war. I just don't want to read about it. I think that books like this are very eye-opening, and I think that there's a time and a place. And like I said, I don't think authors should shy away from these topics, specifically genocide and SA and things that happen during war that a lot of times history likes to gloss over and put a shiny bow on it. And that is discussed in this book, which I did appreciate the author speaking of. There was a line, and I didn't write it down, but there was a line in The Poppy War that says, histories are not made by the people who are correct, they are made by the people who remain. And that does speak volumes. And I've heard numerous accounts of like historical novels and things that will go into the fact that a lot of times, most of the time, histories that are written are falsified to make the victors look better. This book falls into one of the habits of darker books that I've noticed that I should shy away from, which are books that don't tend to have a lot of light with them. I'm okay with darker topics. I like grimdark. However, there has to be some form of relief throughout the book, some form of, whether that's comic relief, whether it's, I don't know, romance, whether it's some type of hope, light at the end of the tunnel. And this book just doesn't have that. And maybe it does for other readers. Maybe I missed something. But this book is full of despair and hatred. And it puts me in a bad mood. It makes me sad. And that's not why I read. And so I think that this book definitely has its own audience. I will not continue the series. I don't care. That's another thing that I kind of realized throughout the book. Because I don't like Ren and I don't connect with her, the only character I cared about in this entire book was Kaiju. I really like his character, and I could read an entire book about his character, and he is kind of a little bit of a cinnamon roll, so he was like my little brief glimpse at light every once in a while, but she just kind of shits on him. And I don't know. That part I had trouble with. There were some relationships that were formed, friendships within the book that were formed that I also just didn't find believable. They were very rushed. I didn't feel like the character development was that great. The character arc for Ren is definitely not great. I didn't feel like she grew at all. I felt like she regressed throughout the entire novel. And maybe that's the point. It is grimdark fantasy. So I don't know. I feel like the only other grimdark fantasy that I've read, I think that's considered grimdark, is The Blade itself, or the First Law trilogy. And there was comedy in those books and friendship, like real character development. That sounds really bad to say that, but I don't know. It's probably not fair to compare somebody, because I'm pretty sure The Poppy War is a debut novel, to compare that to Joe Abercrombie. But I don't know. This just wasn't for me. I'll just leave it at that. I get why this was recommended to me. This does, on paper, sound like something that I would like, with the exception of maybe the war element, because I've had issues with that in the past, but I also have loved it in the past. So that is kind of hit or miss for me, depending on how the author does it. But epic fantasies, grimdark fantasies that have this massive world and this really intricate magic system, it should have been what I loved, but unfortunately it was a miss for me. So as far as my rating goes for this, I am going to rate this a 2.5 star. I thought a little bit about it. I finished this a couple days ago, so I've given myself a little bit of time to sit with it. And when I was reading it, I think I told you guys at the last interval that it was around a 3-star for me. The reason that I am pushing it to a 2.5 is because if I'm going to rate something a 3, it has to be a book that I am willing to recommend to someone, and I will not be recommending this to other people, mainly because of the trigger warnings, and the fact that I can't find something within the book that I would love to talk about with someone. And so I feel like I can't give it more than a 2.5. I don't think it deserves anything less than that. I don't think it deserves a 1-star by any means, because I do think that, like I said, the story covers some really important topics, and it attempts to create some characters that are fascinating and have a tough storyline and, create bonds throughout. I just don't think it succeeded in that sense. Like I said, I didn't connect with the relationships that were formed, the friendships that were formed. I didn't care about them, and they didn't seem more than surface level to me, even though there was a line, and I won't tell you who it was by, but there was a line in this book that says, "You are the bravest person I've ever known. You are stronger than me." And these people don't really know each other. Yes, they've been in combat together, but they've also had like really horrible lives, both of them, in different ways. And it seemed very showy to me. Like, I'm going to say the most pretty thing to you in this moment because it's a dramatic moment and you need to hear it, type of a thing, instead of just being real with each other. So I don't know. I did tell you guys that I was going to come back and say whether or not my prediction for who recommended me this book stayed the same, and it did. After going through all 4 of the Booktubers and looking at what was recommended, I'm confident, I think that this was Beatrice, and I'm so sorry, Beatrice. And if it's not Beatrice, I'm so sorry that I didn't like this book. Unfortunately, it just wasn't for me. I am ready to start my next book, and this is a series that has kind of always been on the periphery. It's never been one that I 100% thought I would ever get to, and that is City of Brass. So I have loved The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi, which is by the same author, and so I believe that was probably why this was recommended to me. The reason that this has kind of just always been on the periphery, like a possibility of something that I would read, but not necessarily something I was, you know, striving to pick up, is because I think that this is a debut novel, maybe. If it's not a debut, it's definitely early works. And it's always a little scary to me to pick up an author's debut work after I've read some of their new works, because I just think it's a really unfair comparison. And so I am going to try and go in like with an open mind. I'm not going to think of this as like, it's not going to be Amina. It's going to be a different story. But yeah, so that's kind of, I've always known, or not always, but I have known of this series. It's just not been something that's been on my TBR. I do think, so I'm going to make a prediction of who I think gave me this recommendation. I think that this was Victoria. And the reason I think that is I know Victoria reads a lot of fantasy, a lot of like, I don't want to say classic fantasy, but like booktube darling fantasy, I think. And I do think that this is one of them. And so I think that this is a Victoria recommendation, but I could be wrong. I am 30% into this book, and so I'll give you guys a general synopsis and then kind of what my thoughts are so far. And I don't know where the plot of the story is going, but I do know that we have two main characters. We have Nahari and Ali, and they're in two different locations. Nahari is a thief slash con man, and she seems to have some sort of magical powers that are not normal for regular humans. And because of this, she ends up getting herself into some trouble. There are some people who are after her. We don't know who they are at this point in time. We know that they're called, well, I don't know if I should even tell you that. We know that there's some people that are after her specifically because of the powers that she holds, but she doesn't even know why she holds them. She doesn't really know anything about her past. And she's always just kind of made her own way by using her skills. She also, her character has lent us to have kind of an eye on the impoverished situation, the kind of caste system that exists, and she lives in Cairo, and so you do get to hear about how the nation has kind of been ravished by war and having different countries come in and take over. And so the governments have changed drastically, and that changes laws along with it. And so it has also changed how she can make a living too. So that part I did find interesting. With her having this thing happen, this like event that ended up causing her to get in trouble and get followed by certain people, there was also an event where a Deva ends up finding her and helping her. And she, I'm still not quite understanding the difference between Jinn and Deva. And I think it's just a title of preference and almost a political stance within the Deva community of who considers himself Jinn and who considers himself Deva. But they're all magical beings, and it's been explained, which I find this very intriguing. It's been explained about like different creatures being different elementals. And so humans are made of earth, and so we are considered earth elementals made of the dust, whereas Deva are made of fire. And we also have met like a character that's made of air and like a whole bunch of other things. But anyway, I think it's very, that part of it was really interesting to kind of learn about. But this Deva is helping her get to the city where all the Deva live. And with that, you also have this side story, which is Ali, who is currently living in the city where all the Deva live. And you learn about the political situation there. There are 6 different tribes of Deva, and they don't mix a lot. And he is of mixed blood himself. So he is of 2 different tribes. And in this city, Daevabad, the city dynamics, like the different portions and different sections of the city and where everybody live, was a little confusing to me. And so I'm definitely going to have to make sure I pay attention as I get back like more into his POV. But anyway, so he lives in the city. He's a prince. And like I said, he's mixed blood. Within the city, they value people who are of pure blood, pure Deva, and not people who are mixed with humans. Apparently Deva and humans can procreate, and so their children have not, they can live in the city, but they don't have as many rights, and they're not seen as important as just Deva purebloods. And so that's where Ali is living, and he is in some political turmoil within his city as well. So I think the general, like where the story is going, is Nahari is going to be the main character, and she, I think, has some connection to some very old blood within the Deva community, and we're going to see like the current political landscape of Devabad change because of Nahari coming to the scene. It's my guess. I don't know if that's what happens because I haven't read the rest of the book, but that's where I'm guessing that we're headed. As far as my general feelings, I think that Nahari's character could either be a character that I genuinely fall in love with or that I actually hate, depending on how she goes from here. I think that she has made some fairly rash decisions so far, and she's definitely a morally gray character. But depending on how her character is handled and the growth arc that I see from her, I could see it going either way. As far as there is some sort of a romance budding between her and the Deva that's helping her, and I really don't like that. I could deal without that. Mainly because he's like 1,400 years old and she's like a teenager. I don't think she's a teenager, but she's young. I think maybe she's in her 20s. I don't know, but definitely too young to date somebody who's 1,400 years old. Anyway, I just, there's so many other things that are going on in the story that are much more interesting, that whenever we have these brief moments of his hand laid on me like a little bit longer than it should have, or he lingered there, or like he paused and looked at me, I'm like, I don't care. Can we like move past this, get to the details? Like, I don't really care about the romance. And I do normally like a romance subplot, but I don't know, it just hit me wrong, I guess. And so that I could care less about. The politics that Ali is involved in, and I'll just say, because you learn this pretty early on, but he ends up being a benefactor for some of the people who are going against his father's rule. He doesn't realize it at first, but that's essentially what's happening. And he finds out that there's some really horrible things happening to the people of the city. And I have been intrigued to learn more about that. So yeah, there's that. I'm currently not gripped by the story. It's dragging a little bit for me. I think that it's a little clunky at times. So right now it's feeling 3-star-esque. I think one of my major critiques about the first part of the story is just how info dumpy it is. We are definitely learning everything through Nahari, which is, it's organic in the sense that she would have these questions. She is not part of the Deva world, and so there's a lot about her origin story that she doesn't understand. There's a lot about the Deva community that she will not know because she didn't live there. And so I do understand that her questioning the Deva that's helping her, whose name is Dada, which I didn't say. I think it's weird to me because for me it sounds like Dada, and I'm like, I just think this is weird to call him that, but whatever. And so essentially you learn everything about the Deva community through her perspective, asking him questions. You also learn some about Ali through Ali's perspective and actually living in events, but so much of what we've learned about the Deva history comes from Nari's experience just asking questions, and it definitely feels more show than tell. And I just feel like we're getting like, it doesn't seem like some of the material is useful to the story until later on. I would have preferred there been like little events where she learns things as certain things are happening, I guess. Whereas this feels like they have a moment, they can breathe a little, and she's like, okay, I have these questions. And then she asks like 3 or 4 questions. He spews information at her, and then we move on. And so that's a little irritating, and that definitely feels like debut novel type stuff. And so that's probably my main critique right now. But I do think that it has potential, and we'll see. So I will update you guys when I'm probably at 60%. That'll probably be my next update, and then when I'm done. So I'll talk to you guys in a minute. I've gotten to 75% of the City of Brass, and I'm not loving it, guys. I'm not hating it either. Right now it's just okay. There are many things that I dislike and many things that I like, and they're kind of canceling each other out at the moment. So to talk about the things that I dislike, I'm really not enjoying any of these characters. All of the men in this book are horrible human beings and are making decisions for really bad reasons or are, sorry if you hear Andy next to me, he's getting comfy in his bed and he's meowing about it. So anyway, they're either making bad decisions for wrong reasons, or they're making bad decisions because of religious reasons or because of bigotry. Like there's a plethora of reasons that I disagree with for the decisions that are being made. So yeah, that's a thing. So none of the male characters I like. Nari, who's our main character, she does have some redeeming qualities that I have enjoyed, but I feel like she is played up to be like this person who is really worldly and kind of like, because of the fact that it was originally in the beginning of the story a con artist, that no one's gonna pull one over on her, essentially. But I feel like she's making some pretty naive decisions. Now, some of that is not her fault, because she also isn't being told anything. Like, she's not being informed on how to do certain things, and she's kind of going in blind in all these situations, and so it's not purely her fault. But there are also some things that I feel like, as living on the streets and as a con artist running for your life for certain things, that there would be certain decisions that she perhaps wouldn't have made. So the characters are one thing I'm struggling with, which is hard for me as a character-driven reader. The romance, I absolutely hate. It makes me mad, and I know I talked about that first clip, that I just really wasn't excited about the romance between like a 20-some-year-old girl and a very old, I can't remember if I specifically put how old this guy is, but a very old person. And that part of it, it is very insta-lovey for me. So it's not just the age gap, because the age gap, like, maybe I could perhaps forget about if their characters were written a certain way, but it very much was, we don't know each other, we kind of hate each other, we're stuck together, we love each other. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. Like, why are we all of a sudden, I can understand feeling responsible for someone and trying to take care of someone in that way and not wanting harm to come to them because you're a good person or trying to be a good person, whatever. But what I don't understand, there was a line that the guy says to the girl, Dada says to Nari at some point in time in their journey, that I wouldn't be able to live with myself if something happened to you. And it was so cringy in that moment that I was like, why? Who is this girl to you? Like, the romance isn't doing it for me. And because of that, there is a scene, and this scene doesn't really have anything to do with the plot, but there are two characters. One of them is Dada, and one of them is another man in this series that are both having certain interactions with Nari, and they spar at one point in time. And it very much is them competing for her. And I just wanted the scene to be over as soon as it started. I was like, this is so gross. I don't care. Like, this just feels like men trying to be alpha to each other to impress a girl, even though she wasn't present for it. No. So, that's that. And what else? Are there any other complaints? While I'm giving you my heart, are there any other things that I disliked? The info dumpiness has definitely gotten better because we have been introduced to the world, and so that is nice. So yeah, I think those might be my main critiques. As far as the likes in this, I do appreciate the world and the information that we've gotten about the Jinn and the Deva and the differences between opinions of the two cultures that are in this society, David. And I do like the political kind of uprising that's happening in the city. I find that intriguing. Although, once again, people's decisions are not being made for the best choices. But anyway, the mystery of Nari's origins I also find intriguing, and I do want to know more about that. I also find the history, maybe I already said this, but when I was talking about the differences between Jin and Deva, I really have liked the kind of backstory on the Deva and the enslavement of some of the people within that culture. Also, like the enemy, the Ifri, that they have kind of introduced, and that was in my first clip, and why, like, they're specifically enemies and how they've been created into what they are. I do find all of that interesting. So we'll see. Right now, it's still kind of sitting at mid-level for me, and I'm not super impressed. I am interested to see how it ends, and I'll give you my final verdict whenever I talk to you next. I have finished City of Brass, guys, and I really didn't like it. There aren't a ton of details that I can give you guys as far as my reasonings behind not liking how this book ended. But I will say that as far as like the other clips that I've given you guys, I have continued to dislike the characters in this story. I have continued to dislike the romance and feel like it's very insta-lovey. I don't understand it. The characters don't know each other and have no reason to be so enamored with one another other than just like surface level attraction. And I don't know, like I feel like the plot at the end got very messy. There are so many loose ends in this book, and I know that it's a series, but one of the things that I have discovered about my reading recently, and I talked about this in, I think it was the first round, like it was round 1, Battle of the Booktubers. There was a book I read there, which I ended up liking the plot and the characters in that story a lot more than this one. But one of the things that ended up knocking off some of the points for that book was the fact that a lot of questions aren't answered. And I understand that there are going to be loose ends in a series because they have to keep the audience guessing throughout. But I also think that timing is everything when it comes to introducing questions and introducing world stuff. And there is so much in this book that I feel like we get little bits and pieces and it's never addressed. And I know it will eventually be, or at least I hope it will eventually be in the series, but that's just, it's too much for me. You can give me a few things in the world that I should be aware of that I don't understand fully in the first book, but it felt like everything was like this. We really don't know, we only know surface level things about everything. I don't know if you guys have ever read the book, I think it's called Ordinary Monsters, and it's by, I think it's J.R. Miro or J.M. Miro. I'll put a picture up on the screen so you guys know what book I'm talking about. But this book gave me those vibes as far as loose ends and little threads throughout. And so I don't know if this is like, this book, City of Brass, is an older story. And so I can't really compare because Ordinary Monsters is a relatively new book. I think it came out within the past couple of years. But I don't know if this is like a version of fantasy or like it's not a subgenre, but like, I don't know if this is a trend within fantasy I just haven't run across in a lot of the books that I've read or a lot of series that I've read, but it's one that I don't like. I don't like having too many questions after the end of the first book. I should have some form of resolution, some form of information that I have gathered that makes me want to continue forward. Because as of right now, the only thing that's wanting me to continue are the questions, not like the overarching, like, oh, I figured out all of these things and I find them interesting and I would like to see how it continues. Now it's just, I want to continue because I want to know the questions, and that's frustrating for me. And so I don't know if I'll continue the series, to be honest. It's very low priority if I do. But I find the world that I think is being created interesting. Yeah. I'm really sad. Don't come for me in the comments because I know that this book is like dearly loved, but I think that my rating of this is going to be a 2.75. It pains me to give this that, but yeah, that's what I'm gonna stick with, 2.75. This vlog's not going too well for me, guys, and I'm sorry. I'm really trying not to be difficult, but I also want to be honest with my opinions. So anyway, on to the next book. I have started my next read, which is The Isle of the Gods, and I am currently 40% in to this, so I didn't do an intro before talking with you guys, and I am going to put this down because the cover is shiny, so I don't want to keep blinding you guys. But this book I was really nervous about because it is YA, and I have not been getting on with YA recently, and so it did make me nervous for that aspect. I've never heard of this book before. This is definitely something, this is one of the reasons I really like this competition, because I would never have picked up this book without this competition, and so far I'm really liking it. I am pleasantly surprised by the characters, their interactions, how easy the storyline is, which a lot of YA is easy to read, but it's not. One of the issues I have with a lot of YA is that they tend to be angsty. The teens in the books tend to be angsty, and I also feel like a lot of the conflict tends to be surface level as opposed to diving a little bit deeper into more dramatic and complex topics and emotions, and I don't feel like that's been the case with this book so far. We'll see. The book has two main characters. You have Sally and Leander, but they are not the only POVs that you get. So far we have, I think, 4 different POVs. I'm not going to tell you who the others are because you'll have to read the book to figure that out. But the overall premise is that we have Sally, who is on a merchant ship as a kind of a deckhand, and her ship is not commandeered, but like requested by the prince, Leander, to take him to the Isle of the Gods. So the religion of the islanders, no. The religion of the book centers around I think there's 7 gods, and all of them had their own nations, and the gods had their own like identities. So there was the god of risks, there was like the warrior god. They all had kind of their own different personalities, and the god of risks ended up going to war with the rest of them, and the warrior god ends up clashing. These two gods end up clashing. So you learn this at the very, very beginning, the very prologue. You get the information about the War of the Gods, the fact that the gods are now gone, and the people have been worshiping their gods but slowly kind of forgetting about them. And there are a lot of things that are coming to a head that deal with their religious beliefs and potentially the waking of certain gods. And I found that really intriguing. The abilities, the powers, how the gods relate to humans, and their powers like rely on human worship, which I've seen in a lot of other books. And I do like that. I like the fact that the gods are dependent and reliant upon their followers. And so we get to follow Leander and Sally on this mission to go to the Isle of the Gods, for Leander to make some type of sacrifice, and we don't know what it is at this point in time, to get his god's help in this impending war that's happening. So yeah, I've enjoyed it so far. I like the characters. I have appreciated, we do get to see kind of both sides of the spectrum as far as the war goes and different peoples that are involved in this conflict. So I like the well-rounded nature of that. I wanted to check in with you now because, like I said, I'm almost 40%. I think I'm 37% of the way through. I am immersive reading this, but if I'm out and about and have only audio, then sometimes I am just listening to it on audio. But I've found the audio really easy to listen to. I'm going to check back in with you guys maybe around 80%, and then, of course, when I finish the book. So I'll talk to you then. I I have reached 87% of the Isle of Gods. I actually meant to update you guys at 80%, but I was listening to this while I was cooking and I just lost track of time. And so that's why it's 87%. I did make it to part 4 though, so I thought it was kind of a good place to stop and update you guys on my thoughts. I am still enjoying myself. I do like the storyline, the gods, the backstory behind them, the kind of mystery with Sully's magic, and the trials and tribulations that our 3 main characters have followed. I also do like the perspective, the 2 perspectives, I guess, that we get on the other side of events as well. So we get to see a more well-rounded world. So all of that I am still enjoying. There are a couple of things I do have complaints about, mainly surrounding the relationship between Sully and Leander. And I think this is something that a lot of YA romances, but romances in general, suffer for me, is an insta-love feeling. I understand the attraction. I understand the characters definitely have chemistry. So it's not as bad as some other books that I've read that are in this vein as well, as far as the characters just falling for each other and really having no reason to. There are things about each of the characters that they contrast and they complement and contrast each other really well. And so it's not 100% an insta-love situation, but there have been a couple of things that I'm like, really? Is this really what we're doing? One in particular is a moment in which Sully she gets herself into a bit of trouble, or she needs to use a little bit of critical thinking, some problem solving skills because of a situation that she's gotten herself into. And this girl is one who has been on her own for the majority of her life. Her father is the captain or the commodore, I guess, of a fleet of ships and has kind of left her on her own. She hasn't had her mother. She's had to sail by herself, you know, with other people obviously, but with not really a parent around. She's had to figure it out on her own. And so I expect her to have a little bit of grit, a little bit of problem solving skills. And in this moment where she really needs to think on her feet, who does she think of but Leander? She had, and it's in her inner monologue where she is discussing the fact that she's like, what did I learn from him? Or what did he teach me? And she goes through these scenarios, these like his voice in her head telling her what to do. And I'm like, why does this girl who has been super independent up to this point now suddenly need her man to help her? Like that part, and I guess so that's not really the insta-lovey piece. That's just a piece of their relationship that makes them a little bit more dependent on each other than I would have preferred, especially her on him. It does make sense for the storyline for him to rely a little bit heavily on her because he is a spoiled prince. He has not lived on the streets and he has not sailed his entire life. And so it does make sense for him to have some of these discussions. But for her, it felt like we were pushing it a little bit further that she needed him for some reason. There was also a moment that I think was meant to strengthen the relationship between them or indicate that they had such a strong bond where Leander is able to semi-solve a problem that Sully has had for a very, very long time. And he does this in lieu of a whole bunch of other people who have tried and failed at this task. So Sully tells us about some of her history and the fact that she has had this particular problem for a very long time. And she has also sought help from a lot of outside sources. But suddenly Leander comes into the picture and he's able to solve the problem, or not really solve, but at least have some progress made in the problem in one day without really knowing her very well. And I know it was meant to kind of seal the bond between them and to show his almost commitment to her in that way, but yeah, I just didn't like it. It seems very unrealistic for me. I do not like when someone who, I don't like thinking that someone is quote unquote special. I want them to have a reason for what they're doing and for why they can do something that no one else can. And it just doesn't seem that way. It just seems like he is just thought to be better than other people in this particular area. And that's just, I want there to be a backstory. And maybe there will be. Maybe somewhere down the line we're going to learn why he could help her with this particular problem. But for right now, we don't know. And that was a little frustrating for me. But currently, like I said, I'm sitting at 87%. Currently, I'm sitting between a 3.5 and a 4.25 probably, depending on how the story ends. I do think the story reads really quickly. It's been fast and entertaining, to say the least. There are a few things sprinkled throughout that have annoyed me, and part of it is YA, but part of it is just my preference in how certain things are developed. Back with my final thoughts on The Isle of Gods. I've let myself sit on this for a couple of days now just to really consolidate my thoughts. I was jumping back and forth between a 3.25 and a 3.75 for this book, and I think I've settled right in the middle at a 3.5. There are a lot of components of this storyline that I do really like. Specifically the gods. I like the prologue, I like the backstory, I like the different kingdoms following the different gods, the war, how humans interact with their gods and how they are involved in the war, how long it's been since the prologue. Those features I enjoyed until the end of the book. I also really liked the camaraderie between the characters in the story as well, with Keegan? I've already forgotten his name. One of the characters, essentially the three individuals who are on the journey together, I really enjoyed their camaraderie. However, with that, a negative would be the relationship between the two main characters. I do feel like still is insta-lovey. I almost would have preferred a super long slow burn between all of the books in the series. I know a lot of people probably wouldn't have liked that because they want to see the romance right off the bat, but it would have been something that would have been more to my taste, because I did feel like the relationship was a little cheap. They don't know each other from Adam. They haven't been together that long. There was no buildup. There's no expectations. They don't know each other. And so I just feel like this amount of depth that they feel for one another, and especially what happens at the end with a component that's hinted at. It's not even blatantly told to you, but something that is useful to one of the people in the relationship from the other one. I just feel like really could have been built upon throughout the story, and it wasn't. I also think that there is something that happens at the very end of the story that does happen in a lot of YA books, but also in adult novels as well, and it's something that really irritates me. I'm not going to talk about it because of the fact that it is at the end of the book, but that kind of disappointed me too. So yeah, all of these components, the fact that I like a journey story, I like friendship, I like kind of like found family-esque, although this is less found family and more camaraderie, just friendship, I guess. But yeah, there were just a couple of components throughout that disappointed me a little bit. I do want to continue the series because I would like to know where this goes. I want to know with exactly what happens at the end, which is a little bit of a cliffhanger. Well, is a cliffhanger. I want to know what happens with these characters' homelands and the gods that are involved to figure out what happens next. So I will continue. It was a really easy read. If it sounds fun to you, you like journey books, do you like seaside, piratey, sailory books, if you like a romance, a YA romance, then maybe this book will be for you as well. I am back with the last book for this vlog, and I am excited about this one. I did have to purchase this story on Audible because I couldn't find it anywhere. So that's kind of exciting because I think that means it's not traditionally published, or if it is traditionally published, it's a smaller publication. I didn't check into any of this. I apologize, but it is a harder book to find. I have heard of this book because I'm pretty sure I have seen this on Witchy Reads channel. So that's my prediction for who gave me this recommendation. And if I haven't said the title already, it's Let the Woods Keep Our Bodies. I'll put the cover up on the screen just in case I got the title wrong. But my prediction is that Witchy did give me this recommendation. So, because I think she's the only person I've heard talk about it. I am already 50% in. I will probably only do 2 updates because I think I'm going to finish the book tonight. It is pretty short and it reads really quick. So I think I'm only going to do a 50% where I'm at now and whenever I'm done. So far, well, just to give you a general synopsis, you are following one girl. Her name is Leo, and she and another girl, Tate, you follow kind of their story. There are 2 timelines in this. So you have a before and after timeline, and you know at the very beginning of the book that Tate has gone missing. And they are both from this very small town where nothing bad really ever happens. And now there is this mysterious disappearance of this girl. She's been missing for 3 days in the furthest timeline that you guys have. And you get the before timeline where you get to see the relationship between Tate and Leo come together and like their summer essentially before Tate goes missing. This is a sapphic romance for those of you who are interested, and I have enjoyed it so far. Also, I should say within the general synopsis that there is definitely some type of spooky paranormalness to this book. Something about the woods, obviously. Let the woods keep our bodies. So I like that. I like those vibes. I will say, just for full disclosure, I read like 30% of this book and I had to start over because I was not like understanding anything that was going on. I think my brain was just in non-absorbing mode, and so I was listening with not actually understanding anything that I was hearing. And so I did go back and re-listen, and now that I've re-listened to that 30% plus the other 20 to get to my 50% that I'm at now, I am really enjoying it. I think that the creepy elements are really spooky. I think that there is enough information given to kind of pull you in and draw you closer to what's happening. I do think that at some points in time when we're just focused on the relationship and kind of like the coming of age-ness of the before timeline, I did have moments of boredom. However, that's really picked up the further I've gotten into the book. Like more and more creepy things start coming into play. And so that's been fun to kind of see the progression of the before timeline. I think my main complaint right now is the fact that since we do have two timelines, but sometimes within the after timeline, we will still have flashbacks to the before timeline. And that's confusing to me, probably because I'm reading it on audio, but also I guess I just don't understand why we're doing flashbacks in the after timeline. If we need to see something, just put it in the before timeline. And my guess for like why the author organized it that way is because so far the before and after, it goes every other chapter. And so maybe those flashbacks allow for there to be more balance when it comes to before and after chapters. But I think that's a little cheaty whenever the after chapters have some before stuff in them. And I also think it's just confusing to the timeline a little bit because I've been in the after timeline and then I'm hearing Tate talk and I'm like, well, that's not possible if Tate's gone. And then my brain catches up and I'm like, oh, this is a flashback. Like this is something that Leo is thinking about in the after timeline, but it takes place in the before timeline. So that part's been a little confusing, a little frustrating, but that's really my main complaint. I do think that the obsession that Tate has over cryptids has been really intriguing, and this journal that she has is also something that is an interest point of mine. I like the research ness. Not that we see a lot of what she did, because we don't ever get Tate's perspective, at least we haven't so far. But with the pieces of information that we've gotten about the journal, the research that has gone into her studying this, and it's just really interesting. Right at 50%, I did find out something that I knew was something that we didn't know. I did not expect it to be what it is. So that's fun. And I wonder what's going to happen with that information that we've gotten. I don't want to give any spoilers because I kind of went into this book blind. I knew that it was a sapphic romance. I knew that it was about the disappearance of one of the girls, but I didn't have any idea what else it was. I knew that the genre was horror, but that's kind of all I knew. And I think it's been fun so far. So I am thoroughly enjoying myself. I will check in with you guys once I finish it. I don't know if I will update you like this evening, because I will probably be reading pretty late into the night. Right now it's 8 o'clock and I think I have an hour and a half left on the audio. And I don't know that I want to film that late, nor do I think I want to rate it before I give it a little bit of time to sit in my head. But yeah, I will let you guys know when I finish it. I am back and I have finished all of the books for round 3 and I'm really excited to have all of these books under my belt. But before we talk about all of the books, I want to talk about the ending of Let the Woods Keep Our Bodies. So I will say that there was so much about this ending that I really did like. There was definitely a creep factor. This book definitely goes where I wanted it to go as far as the horror elements go, and the cryptids and like folklore kind of being interwoven throughout the story I did really enjoy. However, I do think that the author could have dug in a little bit more with the explanations. There are a couple of things that are glossed over a bit especially with what actually happened. There were a couple of things that were just kind of glossed over at the end that it was hinted at their connection with folklore and their connection with certain things in this community and some of the research that had gone on throughout the story, but it wasn't ever really fully ironed out, and I would have appreciated that a little bit. I find that a lot of horror novels actually do that, especially with horror novels that tend to be more in the fantasy realm, like more in the speculative realm as opposed to just horror that's set in our world. Because I think authors, and I'm not saying that this author did this, but I think that sometimes authors bite off a little bit more than they can chew and a little bit more than they can explain. And maybe that's not it. Maybe it's the allure of not having an explanation. I think that's sometimes it as well. But I think there's a difference, for me anyway, between a book that specifically gives you like an ambiguous ending as opposed to a book that never fills in the gaps. And I think that this one kind of leans on it never really fills in the gaps. You definitely have a conclusion. There is a thing that happens and the ending feels like closure. So I'm not saying that things aren't wrapped up at the end. It's just certain things aren't explained, if that makes sense. So that was an issue that I had. I also still, I know I talked about this in the first clip, I had a little bit of an issue with the timing, going back and forth, the dual timelines, but going back and forth between before and after, and the after timeline sometimes having flashbacks to the before timeline, but you're still in the after timeline. It got a little messy at the end, especially because, as a lot of dual timelines do, the timelines converge, right? Or like the events of one of them, like you learn how it connects to the events of the other. And so because certain things were very similar between the two timelines, it was really confusing. I literally at the very end of the book went back and listened to the 3 after chapters and just skipped the before chapters in between them so I could get so I could fully understand what I had just read at the end of the book. And so I think that that could be hashed out a little bit better. I think that it could be maybe organized in a different way, or it also could be that I did listen to this on audio. So perhaps if I had read this like on an ebook or if I had the physical copy, it would have been less confusing to me. So that could be a me issue and not a book issue. I did really enjoy the relationship in this storyline. And I also like the fact that, I don't know what I want to say. The end of the book and the conclusion that is made about the relationship, that's about as vague as I can be. I appreciate it. I think that I like the fact that this author didn't take a typical track with a romance. And so I appreciated that as well. And as I've said, I liked the tie-in with the cryptids. I've also liked the tie-in with some historical components of the town that they live in. I did think that that was interesting to learn about as well. And also, I'm just gonna say, an animal companion that one of the characters has. I really liked that storyline, and I kind of wish that we would have gotten to spend a little bit more time with that, because it was really fun to learn about and to see develop throughout the end of the storyline. I really liked that as well. So with all of those thoughts, I am landing on a 3.75 for this book. I do just wish that a few elements, in order for me to like bump it up to a 4-star, just a few more elements would have needed to be explained for me. But I did have a really good time. It read really quickly, and I enjoyed a lot of components of this storyline. And this also is a book I had never heard of before watching. I'm almost positive I saw this on Witchy Reads channel. And so before Witchy had talked about it, I never would have known this book existed, because it's kind of hard to find. So I am really excited that I got to it and that I can tell people about it during spooky season this year. So with this book, we need to bring this vlog to an end. So I'm going to wrap up all of the ratings. I'm going to try and do them in the order that I read the books, but it's been a couple months since I started this, so I think I have the order correct. The first book I read for this vlog was The Poppy War, which I rated 2.5 stars. The second book I read was The City of Brass, which I rated 2.75 stars. The third book I read was The Isle of Gods, which was a 3.5 star. And the fourth book that I read for this was Let the Woods Keep Our Bodies, which is a 3.75. So it's really weird that it worked out that way, that they just incrementally got better throughout the reading vlog. I do want to say that I appreciate each and every one of these recommendations. These are either books that I didn't have on my TBR that I wouldn't have read, and I'm really glad that this competition has challenged me to pick up reads that are either outside of my comfort zone, or books that I've never heard of before, or stories that I really loved, and some of them I would never have found without this competition. So I'm really grateful for all of the competitors for giving me these reads. I hope that you all have enjoyed this competition and that you have either learned about your reading tastes or found a book that you absolutely loved, or both. Don't forget to join us on Saturday for the live show. I will have posted information in the community tab for you guys, so you know exactly when and where. Also, that's available on the sneak peeks as well, if you guys are interested in times and dates of the live show. So don't miss that. You can come and chat with the competitors and figure out what their thoughts on this crazy competition are and what the final results are for round 3. Until then, happy reading.